Hello, I'm Sean B.W. Parker for Empowering the Innocent, here talking today to Mr. Mike Buchanan of the Justice for Men and Boys Party organisation. It was a political party in the past, and that status has changed somewhat over the last few years, which is a story that Mike will tell us all about. He's also a very well-published author, and he's a music fan and a enthusiast as well, and all things which we'll get into over the next half an hour or so. So let's say hello to Mike. Hello there, Mike. How's it going?
Hello, Sean. Very well, thank you. And it's a pleasure and an honour to be interviewed by you. I think it's very important.
Marvelous. That's very nice.
It's very important work you do. You know better than anybody that there must be thousands of men in British prisons today following rape allegations, many of which are well, just false is the obvious word, isn't it? It's appalling how easily men can be convicted and imprisoned. And I expect the feminists will be pushing hard for juryless rape trials before long. Anyway, back. Sorry, Sean, back to you.
Well, that's a very good point to take us into things, especially with the juryless trials. That's obviously coming soon by all the look of it. Justice for Men and Boys, though, which is a name that the viewing public will understand and probably want to get a bit more context on, because the viewers of ETI are clever people who like a bit of context, which is rare, isn't it? Do you want to explain a bit of the Justice for Men and Boys to us?
Yes, of course, Sean. I suppose my anti-feminism dates back to well, quite some time ago. Between 2006 and 2008, I was a consultant for the Conservative Party at their head office in London, and doing a body of work which was to deliver £11.5 million into Conservative Party coffers over the subsequent 5 years, for which I sometimes put out posts saying I really should be Baron Buchanan of Bedford, on the strength of that huge donation to the Conservative Party. And I even had last year a woman on Facebook saying, "Oh my God, he's openly soliciting a peerage," on social media, which I rather enjoyed. But of course, to small Conservatives like me, what's happened to the Conservative Party in recent years has been just nothing short of tragic. And in fact, I've for some time been a member and strong supporter of Reform UK, but that's something else. I first got interested in feminism around 2009, so a year after I left working for the Conservatives. And what sparked that fire was David Cameron's, who was then in the party was then in opposition. He was the leader. He announced his intention to introduce all women shortlists in a bid to do something about the problem there not being many female of women being in the minority of Conservative MPs, and absolutely, I mean, an appallingly anti-meritocratic and sexist move for a Conservative Party leader. And it was sort of quietly sort of binned, but mysteriously, an awful lot of hopeless women, did become Conservative MPs in due course. But that again is another story. So his intention to bring in anti-male discrimination got me interested in feminism, and it didn't take me long to decide to devote the rest of my life to fighting this evil, deeply evil ideology. And it seemed obvious to me that would have to be done politically. So in 2013, I launched Justice for Men and Boys as a political party. There's probably no country in the world where it's easier to form and launch a political party than the UK. So it was, I think it's like well, it was really super easy. It was £100 or £200. I forget the exact sum now. Anyway, so off we went. The first political party in the English-speaking world campaigning for the human rights of men and boys, as it was 10 years later when we decided that we weren't getting enough traction, and we'd carry on fighting, but not in the form of a political party. But in the early days, it was quite interesting. We got some media coverage, mainstream media coverage, including from the BBC. And in fact, within 2 or 3 days of the announcement, I was on the Jeremy Vine radio show, 7.5 million listeners, being interviewed along with Laura Bloody Bates. One of those names I might have added. But Laura Bates, the woman who later, we always called her the Everyday Whining Project. She ran a thing called the Everyday Sexism Project. And 10 years on, or 13, 11 years on, she's still whining away. An absolutely awful woman. And because of the layout of the studio, Jeremy Vine couldn't see what was in front of us. So I said my piece, and then Laura Bates chipped in. And after a time, Jeremy Vine said, "Are you reading from notes, Laura?" And she said, "No." And she was, and I could see that she was. And to this day, I regret not having stood up, picked up the notes, and said, "Well, what do you call these then, Laura?" So I think there was there was also a video stream of it as well. And I regret to this day that I didn't do that. But a dreadful woman. We got a reasonable amount of TV and radio coverage in the first year or two, but that declined over the years, and it must be some years now since I've been on the BBC. And in fact, there's not I cannot think off the top of my head of a single person you would call a serious anti-feminist or men's rights activist in the mainstream media globally.
Yes,
I mean there is. Argentina, of course, has elected an anti-feminist president, which is a matter for deep joy. And the American election, I mean, almost every MRA that I know is pro-Trump and was absolutely ecstatic at his winning the recent election. And of course, 70% of white men in the United States voted for Trump. So it's possibly, I mean, that and the Argentinian election are possibly the first two indications of an anti-feminist backlash. Not huge so far, but it's things are definitely going in the right direction. But we decided last year that we simply weren't getting enough traction as a party. Wound it up as a party, but we continue to do the same work. Raising public awareness about men's and boys' issues, including false rape allegations, of course. And the allied issue, something we've campaigned for over 10 years, the allied issue of the lack of anonymity for people, well, men, suspected or charged with sex offence allegations, which is absolutely, it's appalling. And in fact, the coalition government or the Conservatives, when the coalition government happened, there was something in the combined Manifesto about reintroducing anonymity for suspected sexual offenders, but that was quietly dropped once they came to power. So that's where we are today. I think we're well known as a pretty prominent campaigning organisation. I mean, resolutely anti-feminist to the core. Yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So that's like it's a 10-year plus story, as you put it, in that way. And when you think about the Javier Milei a couple of years ago, and now Trump coming in at the start of 2025, and also X, Twitter X Elon, 2022 owning that. Now the mood online. I still don't know anybody in my life, or I don't think I've even read them, who hate women. I don't know anybody
No,
like that,
I
but I
don't
know
think
loads of
I
people
don't
who are
think I've
calling
ever
out.
met some. I mean, feminists, but also I think women in general see misogyny everywhere. It's really quite. But I don't think I've ever known or met a misogynist man in my life. I've met one or two misogynistic women. Um, but I mean, I don't think the male brain is capable of it. It is just, I mean, and we see it even in people who are, I mean, victims of false rape allegations. You'd think that they would have a reason to be hateful towards women as a class, but they're not. If they're hateful at all, it's towards one woman or a few women. It's a most remarkable thing. But just staying on British politics for a second. I am personally convinced that our next Prime Minister in 2029 or earlier will be Nigel Farage. I think there's almost a historical inevitability about it. He's even very popular among the youngsters on TikTok. He's got 1 million TikTok followers. And these are very often 16, 17, 18-year-olds who will only be able to, who will be able to vote for the first time in 29. And they absolutely love him too. They see an amazing conviction politician. I mean, he hasn't. I mean, I had lunch with Nigel just a couple of years ago. That was a one-to-one lunch. That was a very memorable lunch for me, at least. And you can't say he's a men's rights activist or an anti-feminist, but he believes in meritocracy, and that means not having, anti-male or anti-white discrimination, like we have in the Equality Act and so on. Nonsense like the long-standing More Women on Boards initiatives. I also run something called Campaign for Merit in Business, and I started that around the time that I presented to House of Commons and House of Lords committees in 2012. I presented them with the evidence of the causal link between increasing the proportion of women on corporate boards and corporate financial decline. And it's hardly a surprise that there is such a causal link. Even though the vast majority of these new female directors are non-executives. But it's only recently that I stumbled across an academic. Well, I mean, there are plenty of studies that show this causal link, but there's an academic, a guy called Professor Alex Edmans, Edmans, of the London. He's a professor of finance at London Business School, and he's been very vocal about the fact that there is not, if you like, a profit motive. That companies will not improve their profits if they take on more female directors. Well, of course they won't. But it's a brave man that says so. I mean, it's barely been mentioned in the mainstream media in the last 15 years that this causal link has been known about. And in fact, it's true of. I mean, I do not know an area where the feminization of professions has not had a seriously negative impact. I mean, education is an example. In secondary schools for a good many years now, they've had mostly female teachers. I think 75 or 80% of them are women. With teaching assistants, 95% plus, if not, certainly 95% are women. And these two people do not educate kids as well as one man did 50 years ago. That's the truth of it. You take the NHS. Why is the NHS in permanent state of collapse? In large part because of the feminization of the workforce. I mean, it goes right back to the 1970s that medical schools were preferencing women over men as students. as potential doctors. And since that time, they've averaged 2 women to every man in education, and the results have been utterly predictable. You know, when I was a child or a young man, 50 plus years ago, you could see a GP the same day generally. Today, you might have to wait weeks. And why is that? Well, more than 50% of GPs are women. And regardless of whether or not they have children and childcare responsibilities, they prefer to work part-time.
Mm-hmm.
So the capacity of the GP service in particular has plummeted over those decades, and that gap could only be filled by recruiting huge numbers of medics and doctors in particular from poor countries which could ill afford their loss. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria. It's absolutely scandalous. I mean, I had a 3 or 4 day stay in Bedford Hospital at the beginning of this year, and Bedford does not have a big BME population, maybe 10 to 15%, I guess, something like that. I must have met 10 different doctors over the course of those days. Not one of them was a white man.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and yet the NHS spends millions on DEI initiatives. When those initiatives are going to end, I'm not sure. Maybe that'll be the day that the last white person works in the NHS. I really don't know. It's anyway. As I always do, I've gone off at a tangent. But I'm hopeful that that Reform UK will adopt some policies that will appeal to men as a class. And the most obvious one, actually, I would say, is fathers being denied access to their children by the family courts. It's a scandal that goes back decades. Both Labour and Conservative governments have been complicit with it. In fact, the last Conservative government appointed a family justice panel, which has, I think, 11 members, 10 of whom are women, and 10 of whom are feminists, so anti-family. So the family justice panel is anti-family. It is utterly scandalous. But I think sorting out the family courts could get a lot of votes, because for every father denied access to his children, and by the way, it's a major driver of male suicide, I'm sorry to say, but one can understand why. In fact, it's a testament to male resilience that more men don't commit suicide after being denied access to children. But for every father who has a vote, there's all the other people denied access to those children. There's his siblings, so the child's uncles, cousins, grandparents, great grandparents. I hear more from grandmothers than I do from fathers, and these women are just distraught at being denied access to their beloved grandchildren. It's beyond criminal what happens to them.
It's such an important point, isn't it? Such a lot of the correspondence that comes to FASO, the falsely accused support organisation, and ETI, comes from women. It's always, and these are non-politicized people. They are just hurting about what's happened to their family, and then they start to hate feminists and feminism, which has been nothing for years for them, and then suddenly becomes this everything. And then there's this. So it's like the chipping away of the normality, which has now taken America back. This chipping away has gone too far of normality, right? And they've taken it all back. And I reckon I know what you mean about Mr. Farage, etc. Here. The chipping away of normality is going to reach its limit here too, and it sort of already has, but it hasn't gone mainstream because the feminist gatekeepers won't allow it to, will they?
No, you're quite right, Sean. I still think public awareness about the true nature of feminism, I think, is still pretty low. I speak to, let's say I'm on a plane or a train or something, I speak to people, and sometimes they're quite embarrassed at being sat next to someone they obviously consider a complete Looney Tune. But feminism is behind, we still have on our website, j4mb.org.uk. Oh, and by the way, as well as campaign for merit in business, can I also just mention a channel that I'm very proud of called Laughing at Feminists, or is it Feminism? Laughing at Feminists, I think, .com, which has a comedy channel with, I think, 160 videos, which I think are just, I think they're pretty priceless. Anyway, where was I? So the manifesto, our final manifesto, which is a couple of years old, is downloadable or viewable on our website. And it covers 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the actions and inactions of the state, almost always to privilege women and girls. Because our central thesis is that if you privilege, I mean, if you divide society up into groups, men and women, if you privilege one group, women and girls, you inevitably disadvantage men and boys. I mean, how could it be otherwise? Feminists always say, because feminists never talk about women's privileges, they always talk about rights. And I used to campaign at Speaker's Corner against male circumcision or male genital mutilation. The carrying out of which, by the way, you may know this, Sean, is a crime under the there's an 1861 Act, which, because it's at least ABH and almost certainly GBH, grievous bodily harm. And there's no exceptions for culture or religion. So this crime, I mean, there's no doubt that carrying it out on other than medical grounds is a crime. And the government takes the income taxes from the damnable butchers who carried it out. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, so our manifesto explores 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted. There are no areas, and there have not been, I think, for I don't know how many decades, in the UK where the human rights of women and girls specifically are assaulted by the actions or inactions of the state. So it's a really remarkable, double standard. And yet the vast majority of people are quite blind to it. So you take, for example, the criminal justice system. 95% of prisoners are male, only 5% female, and the government is planning to build more prisons for the men and close most of the prisons for the women. So it's the most astonishing. I mean, men do commit more crime and more serious crime, but not to that 19-to-1 differential. It is. Anyway, I mean, a book that I would urge any of your viewers to buy is a book by William Collins. He's written several, but the one that I think is absolutely outstanding is a book called The Empathy Gap: Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect. And it is without doubt the most detailed and well-researched book about all this stuff. And he calculates that if women were treated as leniently as men by the as harshly as men by the criminal justice system, several times more women would be in prison today. And we see it every day. I mean, just in the last day or two, we've had the woman who threw a milkshake over Nigel Farage get a suspended sentence, or in other words, no punishment. And women are forever getting suspended sentences for crimes that men would serve years in prison for. And in fact, on the issue, I mean, relating back to false allegations, people are sometimes surprised that the longest section in our manifesto is to do with sexual offences. And I draw there on studies which are still carried out every year by the CDC in the United States, the Centers for Disease Control. Because surveys of this nature are simply not carried out in the UK, or in fact most countries. But they ask questions of men and women, in the CDC studies, which show that about 1/3 of sexual offences committed by people against people of the opposite sex, this is one-to-one sexual offences, around 1/3 of those are committed by women. Which of course raises the issue of why then are there so very few cases and convictions of women for sexual offences against men? I mean, one is men's reluctance to report it, of course. But there are other reasons. I mean, again, it's this double standard in the criminal justice system. So, for example, if you take paternity fraud, there are far more cases of children arising from paternity fraud than people believe. Far, far more. Which is why we've campaigned since 2013 for compulsory paternity testing of children at birth. To me, it's a blindingly obvious thing to do, and I mean, very few men would ask for it, or do ask for it, because of obviously, well, there's a number of reasons.
It's a bit uncomfortable, isn't it? It's a bit awkward.
Well, of course it is. Of course it is.
To ask.
Unless there's something about the baby which is so demonstrably different to the father that it begs questions. But no, you're absolutely right. But the point I'm coming on to is that the government learns just from allegations of paternity the scale of this problem, because, and again, this is in our manifesto. Thousands upon thousands of women every year go to is it the Child Support Agency or whatever they're called, Child Maintenance Service these days? Go to them saying, this man X is the father of this child. And it's amazing how often X is the most well-off man that they know. But anyway, and in those cases, I don't know the proportion, but those cases where the men have the sense to question paternity, then they have to pay for a paternity test, which is not very expensive. And in many cases, I don't know the proportion, but in many cases, the DNA test says that this man is not the father. And so he doesn't have a financial liability. That I don't think is the case in the States. There are even cases of boys who've been raped by older women who have to pay maintenance for maintenance once they start earning. But that's the US. Anyway, so
it's amazing, isn't it?
So the state knows damn well, and researchers know damn well, that a surprising proportion of children are being supported by fathers who are not their biological fathers. And the state has never brought the Crown has never brought a prosecution for paternity fraud. Men have the option of bringing a private prosecution. And apparently some women's defence is what we like to call the slapper's defence, that they thought that was the father.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it was a 10-to-1 chance, wasn't it? Anyway, where was I going? Oh, yes. So, but even in cases where sometimes men discover by accident when their kids are grown up. There's a celebrated case where I think a man had brought up 3 children, and he only found out when they were in their 20s that they were not biologically his. He took the case to court, won, and I think got £20,000, which is absolute peanuts, you know, in comparison. But we must. Sorry, I do. I mean, I imagine you want to talk mostly about false allegations, Sean. Is it?
It's all good, mate. It's all good. No, it's interesting stuff.
Okay. Well, I was absolutely well, delighted is not too strong a word for it, to hear of a woman having admitted that she made a false rape allegation, and that was the woman in the Duke University men's lacrosse team case. So she basically sort of said that she'd been raped by 3 men, named them. I don't think it was ever even. I mean, the feminists, of course, all assumed, you know, in their way of believing, every woman who claims rape has been raped. I mean, they made life impossible. The 3 men, as you can imagine, and I think their university careers came to a grinding halt. And anyway, so she maintained her innocence. Some years ago, she was convicted for murdering a boyfriend. And it was only, I think, a week or 2 ago that she admitted publicly, while still in prison, that she'd made up the allegation of rape by these 3 men. And it's a rare thing. I mean, hopefully we'll come on to the fact that false rape allegations, far from being uncommon, are very common. But it's a rare example of a woman having admitted that she'd lied. And of course, I mean, I don't recall a single piece by a single feminist on the case. And of course, I don't suppose there ever will be. I mean, what, 60? I think it was in 2006. So for 18 years, those poor men, now I guess in their what would they be, in their 30s, have had this damnable thing hang over them. That's you know, that believing woman nonsense. And touching on which, I'd just like to go back to William Collins's book, The Empathy Gap, which by the way, it's a very big book, 700+ pages. So the paperback is over it weighs over 1 kilo. I don't have many books in my library which weigh over 1 kilo.
And, one of those.
I imagine if there's a sleeping dog underneath the letterbox, they must have suffered when that landed on their heads. Anyway, but so because it's so big, it's expensive. It's like £20 plus. But the ebook, which you can buy on Amazon and Apple and lots of other places, costs under £5. And it's just, to me, it's the most impressive book ever written by an anti-feminist or a men's rights activist. It's an amazing book. But he covers most, if not quite all, the issues of concern to men's rights activists and anti-feminists. And he shows in his chapter on sexual offences that this is using only 2 official statistics, incredibly enough. He puts a figure of rape allegations made to the police in the UK being false of 77%. Now, no MRA or anti-feminist is going to be remotely surprised by that, but the public has been led to believe that false rape allegations are rare, in part because of a very disingenuous briefing paper prepared by, among others, Keir Starmer when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. And he basically conflated the rareness of prosecutions for false rape allegations with the incidence, the commonality of, or the frequency of false rape allegations. Now, reading the data behind William Collins's 77% leads me to believe that that is actually at the lower end of possibilities, which is not actually a point that William Collins made. I don't know for what reason, but it seems quite clear to me that 77% is the lowest, and what is highest, what the highest figure would be, I don't know, it'd be in the 90s, but I would not be surprised to learn that 90% of rape allegations made to the police are false.
Mm.
So it's basically rape or other sexual offences against women are rare. I think is the truth of the matter.
Right, indeed. So 77%, eh? And
77%, yeah.
the issue here, isn't it, which I often talk about with Dr. Michael Norton of ETI, is the definition. It's not. Of course, the stats of false allegations and whatnot are important, but if one defines rape as something, and then stats it as something completely else, and basically what we say is all men are rapists, the old story, and they've made it so, and we're living in that situation at the moment without realizing it. Did you know what we mean?
Yes, oh, absolutely. Well, the Sex Offences Act 2006, I think it was, infamously meant, among other things, that women could no longer rape, because rape could only be carried out with a penis. So the female equivalent, forced to penetrate, was downgraded, if you like. And in fact, this is something we cover at some length. It was said at the time that the two were equivalent in the law, but it's not the case. I forget the exact details now, but the maximum sentences for forcing penetration is considerably lower. And it's often thought, I think we'll come back to sort of male rape of women in a moment, but this being forced to penetrate, it's a common myth that a fearful man couldn't have an erection. It's an absolute myth. Hence, I guess the frequency with which it happens, according to CDC studies. But yes, again, it's an incredible double standard. You ask yourself, why do people drink alcohol? Well, one reason is to lower inhibitions, isn't it? And so the question then, so let's say, university students, I guess, is young people, but university students are an obvious example. When they're new at university and they get drunk in Freshers' Week and at other times, and what student doesn't know that the chances of their ending up having sex at the end of an evening is raised by their drinking alcohol? Mm-hmm. Is there a woman at university so stupid as to not believe that to be the case? So then that begs the question, well, why is it that, let's say, a drunk man and a drunk woman, wherever they are on the spectrum of drunkenness, which of course is another issue all on its own, isn't it? But a man and a woman who've had each other attractive and have sex, he not only has responsibility for himself, he has responsibility for her. She has none. Literally none. Mm-hmm. So what is there? I mean, equality, of course, to feminists never means equality of responsibility. It's quite scandalous. I mean, So I don't know what proportion of rape, rape, or cases that are brought for rape involve alcohol or other drugs. But I'd be surprised if it wasn't the majority of them.
It's almost all of them, I think. I'm led to
Well,
believe.
yeah, and I have something on the few occasions when the left-wing media have attacked me, including the Guardian. They invariably point to or mention an article written by a woman called I forget what her real name is, but she blogged for a time as Judgy Bitch, a Canadian woman, beautiful woman. She spoke at one of our London conferences, international conferences on men's issues, and she wrote an article called 13 Reasons Women Lie About Being Raped. And it's not even I'll tell you, Sean, it's not even a comprehensive list. I mean, 9 out of 10 of rape allegations will fall into those 13, but there are others. And one of them, of course, is regret sex. You know, we've all heard the expression beer goggles. But for men, the idea that the idea being that women are a lot more beautiful after 5 pints of ale than they are beforehand.
And they both wear them. They both wear them each
Well,
way.
this is it. And I always say for women, the equivalent is Chardonnay glasses or something, or Sauvignon spectacles. But anyway, but yes, it's a very well known phenomenon that the old saying goes that no man's ever has ever gone to bed with an ugly woman, but my God, a lot of them have woken up next to them.
Right.
And but yes, I mean, but when they're sober, men and women, should know that if they drink, their inhibitions will be loosened, and sex is a possibility. I mean, if we hold them responsible, equally responsible, which I think we should. I mean, nobody is saying that a man should have sex with a woman who's blind drunk or unconscious. I mean, do I even need to say unconscious? I mean, does anyone need to say that? But at what point? At what point on that spectrum does it's? And of course, you couldn't even put a blood alcohol. You couldn't even define it in terms of blood alcohol, Sean, could you? Because
everyone's different.
The same amount of alcohol will make some people will hardly touch some people and send others asleep. So it's very difficult. But no, I think. But the idea that and then the issue, I guess, becomes at what point on that spectrum, and I honestly don't know what the answer could be to that.
It's not exactly. It's the allegation itself. It's the reframing of the power dynamics into these different things, always in order to keep the Vogue funding going. And that's what it all appears to be about, doesn't it? And the dynamic in the House of Commons, where you've got Jess Phillips for Labour over here banging on constantly about feminist issues, and Caroline Noakes of the other colour banging on in the same way, and you're like, and Reform, for all the controversy, they're doing a great job of being noticed. Let's leave it at that. It's brilliant. Is at least they're going in and saying this is all bullshit, and they are post bullshit. Well, I think what everybody likes in this country, me included, is that Reform, whether I vote for them or not, I would never say that as a journalist here, that they are post bullshit.
Yes.
And Mr. Musk and Trump have got in because they're post bullshit. So if Starmer doesn't realise that, the bullshit master himself learned from the bullshit godmaster Tony Blair, then it's like, if he doesn't realise that, then there's the numbers, as you're pointing out, I think.
Indeed. Well, the first minister for women was Harriet Bloody Harman, of course, in 1997. But one of the I think, very justified criticism that small c Conservatives have of the Conservative Party. And I think certainly from 2005 onwards, when David Cameron became leader, they have never reversed any feminist legislation. In fact, it was a Conservative government which it was only days after the coalition with the Lib Dems came to power that that David Cameron appointed Lord Davis of Abersock, a Labour peer, to produce a paper on how to increase the proportion of women on corporate boards. Not whether to do so, mark you, but how to. And so the Conservatives never reversed anything feminist. Even I remember, who is it now? I don't think he's Dominic Raab MP once talked about used an expression about feminists. I forget exactly what it was now, but it was quite a strong thing. And
Dominic Raab, there's a name from the past. Yeah.
Yes, he would have been a good prime minister. I don't think he stood at the last election, sadly. But I would struggle to think. I mean, Philip Davis, of course, who spoke at a number of our international conferences, he challenged feminism in his talks. But he was voted out, sadly, at the last general election. So there is not, to the best of my knowledge, an anti-feminist elected politician in the English-speaking world. Somebody who really, apart from the Argentinian president, I guess, but even Trump doesn't. You don't hear him. He's obviously not a feminist, but even he thinks it's judicious not to really come out as an anti-feminist. I've gone off at a tangent again, Sean.
No, I got to drop in there, though, how fascinatingly interesting it is that 6 months ago, the term for him isn't guilty, isn't it? But it's liable of sexual assault or rape. And all of those terms are so vague. I was talking about definitions.
Yes.
He was found liable for all that. And the point about Me Too, etc., is that America en masse has said, we know all that stuff is overdone and bullshit, to the point that we'll elect him as our head of state. That's how much they don't care about it anymore.
Indeed. It's sheer madness. I think he's been found guilty of sexual offences against some women. There's not even proof he ever met them.
Right.
And then, of course, there was one woman who got, $13 million. I think if you offered $30 million to women to be raped by Donald Trump, that would be some cue.
Yeah.
It is
especially 40 years ago.
Yeah. Or even today, I would suspect, Sean.
Yeah,
it is the term lawfare. It is lawfare, and he's risen above it.
It's so destructive. It's so destructive to values. If you have any values, if anything such exists in X world and the feminist world, let's be even clearer, then these things have to have some sort of a meaning, don't they? And they apparently don't.
So it'll be interesting to see what Reform have to say in their manifesto, if anything, about things like the family courts, about anonymity for suspected sexual offenders, because just the lack of anonymity itself is punishment, isn't it? I mean, just claiming, invariably rich, famous man raped you. It's including.
It's the false allegations industry, isn't it?
It is. It's and a bit like the family courts. It keeps lawyers rich but destroys lives. And so it'll be interesting to see what Reform do. Sadly, we will have to wait 5 years for them. But I really cannot. Somebody who was a Conservative Party member for a lot of ex-Tories like myself say it's not that we've left the Tories left us. So I'm just at the moment reading Margaret Thatcher's autobiography. Absolutely fascinating. I mean, to me, I think to most Conservatives, whether big C or small c, the greatest peacetime prime minister since Churchill, since World War II. I think, again, you may not be a fan of her, but I would put her and Nigel Farage as the two great politicians since World War II. I mean, no, I mean, I suppose you could say Blair had success electorally, but in terms of great politicians, I think that those two would stand out for me. And I'm conscious that probably Farage in particular, well, both of them are kind of Marmite characters. So I suspect some of your viewers would have switched off at the mention of both of them.
Now, I find what's one of the most interesting things about our chat today is that you talking about the genesis of Justice for Men and Boys in 2013, and now literally 10, 11 years later, 2023, 24, is how the things that you're talking about have come to pass, especially on X, on the binary X, of loads of people love Thatcher, and if not her policies, because they're too young to remember the spirit of things, the spirit of integrity and stuff like that. So stuff that you're thinking, oh, no, they're going to turn off. I think they're actually much more switched on than we'd imagine. And anyway, Mike, we've done a lot here, and so let's be kind to our viewers. And we're just talking about Margaret Thatcher there, and people like that. And I think she's mentioned in this book, Feminism, The Ugly Truth, which I read a few years ago when over the lockdown period, if you know what I mean.
Remember. Yes.
And that was it was a fantastic book. It's an incredibly striking title, which was hard enough to get through my front door, if I remember rightly, because the postman was so alarmed by it, or something like that. And as Thatcher's mentioned in there, it's a very well written thing. It's much less, let's say, salacious than the cover makes it out, because Mike's a very, very cerebral writer. And also book fans.
Can I also just say something I like to tell people? I think only once in my life I've written 10 books. I think they're all on Amazon, but only once. I haven't actually written a book since Feminism: The Ugly Truth. I think that was 2015, and I don't know if I ever will write another one. But only once have I ever laughed out loud when I thought of a chapter title. And it was to do with Tracy Emin, who is the most, well, she's a feminist for a start, because she was pictured in one of those T-shirts. This is what a feminist looks like. Anyway, so she was professor of drawing at the Royal Academy, despite having absolutely no artistic talent at all, so far as I could see. And it suddenly occurred, so I wanted to do a little chapter on her, and this thing just came out of clear blue sky and made me laugh. And so the chapter title was, "Are some feminists, e.g. Tracy Emin, a pain in the arts?" I still laugh when I think about it 10 years on. But anyway, that's
not bad, a bit close to pun. But
and I think you have another of my international bestsellers you're about to show.
I do. This is the Philosopher's Stone to the Dark Prince or whatever we're talking. Anyway, the joy of self-publishing, which is a whole other area of which we haven't talked about today, because it's something else that Mike knows a lot about, and I know too, and lots of people that we're talking. You know, self-publishing is not the crap thing that it once was. It's actually something that's kind of powering loads and loads of great. And this sort of book, which is seriously done and very clearly done as a how-to, is very, very helpful in that kind of thing. They're both at Mike's Amazon, as he said, as where these things live. So yeah, there's a bit of promo for that.
Thank you. I think they're both available, I think, in both paperback and ebook. But just staying on that just for a second, if you can just indulge me for a second. I ran back then, and I still run to this day, LPS Publishing. And so if you go online, that's lpspublishing.uk, I think it is. And I basically publish for other people, because it's one thing to write a book, it's quite something else to publish it. And even, I mean, you could publish using my guide. That'll tell you everything you need to know. I think just about the only thing that's happened in the 10 years since I wrote that, or 12 years since I wrote that book, Sean, is that Amazon, for some years now, have printed books by print on demand. So for that goes back 15 or 20 years. So the idea is that if somebody orders, let's say in Australia, a copy of one of my books, one copy is printed and sent to the buyer. And when I wrote the book, Amazon weren't doing that themselves, but they are now. The alternative is a company called Ingram Spark. But other than that, I think the book is, the book is as valid today as the day it was written.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you for letting me shamelessly plug them.
If it weren't such good bits of kit, especially the ugly feminist, because it's very universal for everything. Everyone listening will go, "Oh, I get my hands on that." You absolutely should, because it's a really, just like the William Collins book, which I can testify. I haven't read the entire Bible of the William Collins thing, but I've read lots of chapters from it. It is brilliant, as Mike says. But this is also very, very good, and probably much more witty than William Collins. Let's admit that as well.
And I think also probably with more humour, because I do like to get humour into my writing wherever possible.
Well, British at the end of the day, isn't it? Right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Mike, for this. It's been a right old riot, as it is when we meet now and again. So we've given you all the links. You know where to go and buy our stuff, and we've also sorted out the future of the West, as I think we do. Right?
Indeed. No, things are going in the right direction at long last, Sean.
Yeah, that's definitely how it feels, isn't it? So with that thought, signing off. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you, Sean. Take care.